Okay, we're gonna start.
So, welcome Zero Project community. It is a real pleasure to have so many of you with us at the Zero Conference 2021. With over 3,400 participants online, this year's virtual conference has become a truly global gathering space for those committed to disability inclusion. With so many attendees from all around the world, it is easy to forget to mention the backbone of global gatherings like these, namely trusted partner organizations such as the ILO. Thank you so much for putting together this valuable partner channel session. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you with us today. Without further ado, I wish you well and look forward to seeing you online and on the conference platform. All the best.
Yes, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm Stefan Trömel, Senior Disability Specialist in the International Labour Organization, and I'm also coordinating the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. And it's a great pleasure today to be moderating this this session, addressing what I would define as a frontier issue, a new issue within our community. And I would like in particular to thank Susan Scott Parker, who was one of the speakers, for in fact having taken the lead on awareness on this important issue within the business and disability community. We all have seen, we have been listening these days, and we will continue to listen today and tomorrow about examples of technology, including artificial intelligence, that are really having a very positive impact on the lives of persons with disabilities, and including also on their employment opportunities. But today we will be looking at artificial intelligence from a slightly different angle. We just launched yesterday a report on the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the digital economy. I encourage you all to read it. It looks at the impact, in particular also of the COVID-19 has had on the current situation. It makes some recommendations in terms of how to ensure that persons with disabilities will benefit from the opportunities of the digital economy. It's not straightforward. There are challenge opportunities. It lies on us to make sure that we push for the opportunities and address the challenges. Now, this is a very important topic for ILO GBDN members. We know that initial recruitment, let's say the entry door for persons with disabilities into the private sector, for instance, continues to be a door that often is not wide enough, it's not open enough. We know that sometimes it is about human-based recruitment processes that leads to failure. Interviewers, human resource staff are often not well prepared to highlight or identify the talents that persons with disabilities can bring to their companies. And many experiences which we know about. We are seeing, and we are addressing it, in fact, through a new initiative in collaboration with the International Telecommunications Union, another UN entity. We know that there are barriers to online recruitment, e-recruitment. Very often there are steps in that process which inadvertently exclude some people with disabilities, at least. All that we already know, and then we're starting to work on that. But today we're going to look at a new angle. As you know, many large companies, in view of the very high number of job applications that they receive, are starting to use recruitment software that will help them to filter from these thousands of applications they might receive. They will filter out some of those, or many of those, so that human intervention only comes in at the later stage, dealing with those applications that have passed these first tests. Now, evidence shows, and Susan will highlight that this software, which is based on artificial intelligence, if it's not well done, and we've not yet seen any of, I think, any of the software that's dealing with that adequately, can lead to the exclusion of people that fall out a bit of the norm. It can be because of disability, it can also be because of other issues. And I think that is the big issue that we are addressing here today. Put yourself in the shoes of a large company that is committed to disability inclusion, that is a member of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network, that committed to disability inclusion, but perhaps the human resource department would have recently acquired such a software. And inadvertently, and without the knowledge of our colleagues, this new software is leading to the exclusion, to not giving candidates, possibly some candidates with disabilities, not giving them the chances to get a job in that company, in that organization. As you know, in these frontier issues, legislation is always behind. First, these issues come in, these new changes. We have legislation protecting from discrimination on the basis of disability. We have the UN Convention. But when we were drafting the UN Convention, this was not yet an issue. So legislation will always be a step behind. We're always trying to catch up with these new situations. And that's one of the discussions we should have today. We also are seeing that there are a lot of discussions in the AI, artificial intelligence community about the ethical implications of AI. We've heard some of those discussions, the use of robots, of drones in a military context. I mean, we've seen all that. But it's also fair to say that the disability angle to that ethical discussion or the ethical dimension of artificial intelligence has not yet taken off. So these are hopefully topics that will interest all of you. We had initially planned to have 3 keynote speakers, all excellent, but one of them, Céline Nugent from the Oxford University, who is directly working on artificial intelligence and ethical implications. It seems she has a very significant migraine today. And of course, migraine and a Zoom webinar is not necessarily the best combination. So it seems, I'm still looking at the list of panelists, it seems that she will not be joining us, which means that we will have more time to hear both from Susan as well as from Yves Veulliet, and also, of course, more time for question and answers, which you can, especially those of you who are directly connected on the Zoom platform, you can definitely send those to us through the Q&A box that you should have at the bottom of your screen. So I will ask now for a second both Susan and Yves to put on your camera so people can see whom we have on the call alongside myself and our 2 international sign interpreters. So as mentioned, we have with us Yves Veulliet, Global Disability and Inclusion Leader within IBM. Yves, always good to see you. Yves was also chair of the ILO Global Business Disability Network back in 2019 and has always been a very active leader in the business and disability community. And of course, you all know Susan Scott Parker. Susan, I can't see your camera on. So I'm asking for some support from our technical team to allow for Susan to be seen, especially as Susan will be our first speaker today. So we were just vetoing your image. Susan is well known. She's the CEO and founder of Business Disability International. I don't think there is any other person in the world that has so much experience on business and disability as Susan. I know Susan, we know each other for many, many years. And already before we met many years, you already had been working on this issue for a long time. But not only have you this huge, vast and long experience, but you always are so good in bringing to our community these new issues, these new challenges that many of us had not even thought about when I first heard about it. You brought it to our conference in November 2019. It's the first time you had a short presentation on it. I know you have been working with companies and with universities on this issue. So thank you, Susan, in particular, for bringing the attention to our community to this issue, and the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. You know, as I'm listening to your introduction, Stefan, you're talking about large companies. However, I'm convinced that one of the reasons this is particularly important to our international community is that the use of this artificial intelligence recruitment HR technology is going to be increasingly fashionable with the smaller organizations, And my fear, of course, is that if we don't address this now and with urgency, we could see labor markets, well, say Nairobi, where every employer will be using this technology because it seems to be so effective. And it will be very difficult for any non-standard applicant, not just, but particularly people with disabilities, to get a job unless they're going through the process. So I wanted to just take us a little bit today through why I became obsessed, if you like, with this issue. And it really started with an article I read in the UK press, which quoted a recruitment technology company saying that they were proud that their standardized assessment process removed human bias because every candidate would be treated exactly the same. Well, obviously I was startled. I mean, surely everyone knows that the essence of treating disabled candidates fairly is to flex the process, to make reasonable adjustments or accommodations at every stage, to create a level playing field. I mean, it's just called equal opportunities. Imagine asking Stephen Hawking to climb stairs to the interview just because the standard process says everyone must use the stairs. So of course, I started to ask questions. And it immediately became clear that for many recruiters, their primary task, given as Stefan says, the numbers of people now applying online, their primary task seems to be to discard as many as possible, as quickly as possible, and of course, as cost effectively as possible. It also became immediately clear that neither developers nor their HR customers, despite all the talk about bias that is emerging in the AI and ethics debate, none of these individuals were talking about disability bias. They weren't addressing the impact of these tools on the people with disabilities that make up 15 to 20% of the population of any country. And then as we looked at this exploding HR tech marketplace, so many different types of products, from testing CVs to doing all kinds of assessments and so on, we realized we were looking at AI-powered tools which have the potential to damage the life chances of hundreds of millions of persons with disabilities around the world. Even though, now I have some statistics that I would use with an audience of technology experts in artificial intelligence. I'm sure this audience knows, at least 1 in 3 humans will have a disability or be close to someone who is. 1 in 5 women will have a disability. At least 1 in 3 people aged 50 to 64 will have a disability, regardless of ethnicity. And at least 10 to 12% of any workforce will have a disability in large organizations and or a chronic health condition. So you can rattle off these stats. And we're talking about a sector that really focuses on data and intel and statistics and so on. So it was very puzzling not to see persons with disabilities ever referenced in this growing debate regarding responsible AI. In fact, it seems that disabled people are so missing from the debate that no one's even noticed that they're not there. To illustrate, I was told by one large AI firm that a tool designed to detect AI bias can't detect disability bias because, and I quote, well, they aren't in the database. And of course, given disabled people are always at least twice as unlikely to be in work, and given most HR technology focuses on data regarding people in work, well, I guess it's safe to say that if you aren't in the database, you never will be. If we look at the actual assessment tools, neither their content, their usability, nor their accessibility has usually been validated or tested on job seekers or on employees with disabilities. The video interviews, for example, which assess the extent to which your nonverbal communications, your word choice, your voice pattern, even your voice tone, your eye movement, they assess the extent to which all of this matches those of the ideal employee, but they ignore the impact of disability on a candidate's nonverbal communications, word choice, voice tone, eye movement, etc. There's a virtual reality test, for example, where you are dropped into an ancient Egyptian tomb to test your problem-solving skills. My friend, who's a wheelchair user, says he dreams in his wheelchair. Will that virtual reality test let him use his wheelchair as he navigates his way out of the tomb? Actually, I was told today it won't. And so imagine what it would be like for him to be dropped into an ancient Egyptian tomb as a walker. And then we see the increasingly popular gamified assessments. How many have checked that the gaming controls can be used by people with limited dexterity or color blindness? Do you remember the young man whose disability, Tourette's syndrome, caused his hands to twitch? He posted a story on LinkedIn saying, as he tried to get through these gamified assessments, it was impossible to find any human beings he could talk to explain that he could actually do the job. It's just that he could not play the game. And there's a crucial but unrecognized difference between biased data and the unfair treatment triggered by how the automated process actually works in practice. You know, little things like no captions on a video interview or timing candidates out after 3 minutes. I mean, if you take the Swedish robot interviewer, the website for their company claims they have eliminated human bias regarding race and gender. Well, my data scientists tell me that if humans invented it, it can't have eliminated human bias. Anyway, there's a scientific challenge there. And of course, there's no reference to disability bias, but then there never is. So we keep going. And then as you look at this, you think, how does this robot deal with a candidate who could sail through if he could lip read the robot, or he could use a sign language interpreter and the robot would know who to look at? How does this robot adapt for the excellent candidate who stammers and just needs more than the standard 20 minutes? Or someone who could do the job, but because of their intellectual disability, they need the robot to turn those standard questions into shorter sentences. How does someone with, what should we call it, a non-standard face, a facial disfigurement or acid burns, Down syndrome, how do they get through a video interview when their face doesn't register as a face? Or someone who doesn't make eye contact because they can't, or who doesn't smile because they can't. Standardized, let's call them what they are, rigid recruitment processes are by definition inherently discriminatory. So the big question is, who is responsible for ensuring equal opportunities at every step of the way? And isn't it curious that as I even say equal opportunities, it feels so old-fashioned? Somehow the language of diversity is diverting us from the fact that first we have to ensure fair treatment. Well, developers say it's the employer's responsibility in law. And then the employer says, but our supplier tells us that this inflexible process is unbiased precisely because it is standardized. Neither make it possible at any stage for the applicant, as they're trying to apply for the job and go through the application process, to request dignified and equitable access to equal opportunities at any step. They don't make it possible to ask for the adjustments with equal fair treatment, given fair treatment is only made possible by adjusting the process so it's not standard. And then we have the fourth dimension to the problem. So we've got the disability bias in the data, standardized process that trigger unfair treatment. We've got HR buyers, diversity managers, and AI developers who just don't understand disability discrimination. And in addition, we have developers and their HR clients who ignore the impact of the future employer's behavior on the tool's ability to accurately assess whether this candidate who has a disability could do the job. How could an AI tool accurately assess a blind cybersecurity expert? If the tool fails to ask, will the employer let this candidate use the tools she needs when she starts the job, voice-activated software or whatever it might be? She cannot be accurately assessed for a cybersecurity job unless the tool recognizes that blindness on its own need not preclude high performance. The tool does not assume successful candidates will make eye contact in the standard way. The assessment takes into account that the employer will or will not make the reasonable adjustment that's needed so that she can succeed. And finally, the process does not stigmatize the candidate who is discovered by the artificial intelligence tool to be non-standard and who then needs to sort of ring a bell to call in a human assessor to the process. So the good news is we are making progress. The first such white paper, Recruitment AI Has a Disability Problem by Salin, such a pity she couldn't be with us today. Her white paper focused primarily on the risks to the employers and to the job seekers. was published recently by Oxford Brookes University's Institute for Ethical AI. Please take a look at it. Ceylin welcomes ongoing comment. She sees this as very much work in process. IBM recently published a second paper called Designing Artificial Intelligence Applications to Treat People with Disabilities Fairness. They present 6 steps to fairness, which I think you'll find very useful. And again, I know IBM welcomes comment and very much hoping that Yves will be with us today to take us through a little more detail. Simmons & Simmons, the global law firm, are continuing to work with us as we look at what HR needs if they are to minimize the risks here. So in effect, this is buyer beware territory, because if the HR community starts to better understand the risks that appear when they deploy this technology without really challenging the extent to which it is delivering equal opportunities for everyone, well, they can really be a force for change here. And I must note that HireVue, a market leader in terms of AI-powered recruitment assessments, have announced that they will no longer analyze a candidate's facial expressions in video interviews following an independent risk audit, which I think is really quite significant. And we see human rights and equality regulators beginning to consider adopting some of the principles that shape not just the human rights equal opportunities related regulatory environment, but consumer protection. I would certainly argue that developers should be required by law to prove that their artificial intelligence recruitment tools are safe for disabled and other disadvantaged job seekers before they can put them on the market. In conclusion, we know that systems that work for extreme users work better for everyone. A fair and accurate recruitment assessment that enables someone who is deaf or blind or dyslexic, autistic, facially disfigured, has a mobility impairment, has a speech impairment, and so on and so on. Systems that enable individuals as extreme users to actually be assessed fairly and accurately are more likely to work better for everyone. I mean, my throwaway remark at this point is usually even a not yet disabled Canadian woman could get through. So I think in terms of our conversation today, I'm very interested in the extent to which the advocates in the disability community can join us to raise the profile of this issue. We're really not seeing, if you like, much energy around this. As Stefan said, it is an emerging issue, but now is the time when the developers are just beginning to start to listen to the entire debate around ethics and responsibility, to say it's not enough just to talk about gender and about race. You're talking about women with disabilities. You're talking about ethnic minority individuals with disabilities. You're talking about people with disabilities, because if you're not, ethics for some is not ethical. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. There are so many issues that you have been addressed. Participants will be happy to hear that we are recording the webinar, and you will be able to listen more carefully and calmly to so much information that Susan has already brought up. And definitely there are a number of issues. I will come back to you, Susan, after Yves' presentation. Yves, Susan has already put you on the spot because she has referred to the work that IBM has been doing. So without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Stefan. You know how much I love to be under the spotlight. So it's not really a difficult moment for me. Now, seriously, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you here. So I'm not going to repeat what Susan said, but when she started to speak with me about this, basically, IBM's position around ethical AI is clear. We've put in place what we call an AI ethics review board to make sure that all our applications, all our solutions that we sell to our clients, that we implement internally, etc., is really matches the highest ethical standards possible. And basically, IBM has a long tradition of welcoming, including people with disabilities or diverse abilities within the IBM corporation. And AI, basically, IBM is a hybrid cloud and AI company. And so for us, it's extremely important to address this issue and to tackle the possible risks of having people with disabilities excluded from the job market simply because the algorithms are not defined appropriately, are not inclusive enough. IBM's position is pretty clear on this in this space. We believe that the purpose of AI is to augment, not replace, augment human intelligence and human decision making. Basically, IBM says that AI solutions must account for everyone. As artificial intelligence becomes, I would say, pervasive, high-profile cases of racial and or even gender bias have emerged, as Susan said. But discrimination against people with disabilities, and let's face it, is a long-standing problem in society in general. It could be reduced by technology, as a matter of fact, but it could also be exacerbated by it. And so we have a responsibility, IBM has a responsibility as an IT technology company to, we are basically technology creators to ensure that our technologies reflect our values and shape lives and I would say society for the better. Challenges in fairness for people with disabilities, I would say that stem from human failure to fully consider diversity when designing, testing, and deploying systems. If standardized processes like the recruitment pre-screening system are not built around inclusive algorithms, there is a major risk of systematically excluding people who do not belong to the standard models of employees in general. So as Susan said, to address this risk, we offer ways to develop AI-based applications that treat people with disabilities fairly by embedding ethics into AI development from the very beginning. And this is important. If you do that from the very beginning of the creation of algorithms, you will avoid 90% of danger of creating biases. This is what we call, as Susan said, the 6 steps to fairness. So I'm not going to go into the details of all these fairness steps, but you will find, I assume you will receive a link to the IBM paper as part of this recording of this session. But in a nutshell, these 6 steps are for web developers, where algorithm writers are identifying risks, involve stakeholders, define what it means for this application to be fair, plan for outliers, test for model bias and mitigate, and last but not least, build accessible solutions. So this is for the IT part of our recommendation. But there is also a crucial, essential stakeholder that must be mentioned in addition to IT specialists, buyers, etc. It's policymakers. They also have a role to play about balancing innovation, inclusion, and fairness in the presence of rapidly advancing AI-based technologies. We call for a risk-based use case focused approach to AI regulation. Applying the same rules to all AI applications would not make sense, given its many users and the outcomes that that derive from them, from their use. So we believe that governments and industry must work together to strike an appropriate balance between effective rules that protect the public interest and the need to promote ongoing innovation and experimentation. With such a precision regulation approach, we can answer expectations of fairness, accountability, and transparency according to the role of the organization and the risk associated with each use of AI. Getting the balance right between fairness, precision regulation, innovation, diversity, and inclusion will be an ongoing challenge. This is a reality that we have to live with for policymakers worldwide, but it doesn't prevent them from starting to really think about it and to really start thinking about how to best tackle this risk going forward. Because as Susan said, this is not something that will happen in 10 years from now. This is happening today. And this is now the time to start thinking of working together. Policymakers, IT developers, associations, GBDN, all NGOs, everybody, all stakeholders must work together to fix this. So, as I said, IBM believes that the purpose of AI is to augment, not replace human intelligence and human decision making. And so to conclude, I would say that AI systems must be transparent, robust, and explainable. Although the development and deployment of AI are still in their early stages, it's a critical tool whose utility will continue to flourish over time.
Thank you very much, Yves. As I mentioned at the beginning, we were planning to have a third speaker who comes from the AI community and looking at the ethical dimension of AI. So I think that she would have made a huge contribution to it. But I know that both Yves and Susan, you have been in contact with her and are aware a bit of some of this working process in progress that that Susan you mentioned. Perhaps what I would suggest now, I will come up with a few questions to both of you. On some questions, I might perhaps target one of you specifically, but please feel free to come in, both of you. And the good thing about having lost a speaker, we have more time than one usually has for these discussions. But I think we're going to make a good use of it. Now, you both mentioned the important role of disability organization, and Susan, you rightly point out that so far there has been little attention by the disability community to this issue, which I would say it's not such a surprise. I mean, there's so many challenges still that the disability community has to face that such a sort of niche issue, first, it just requires that an awareness raising. I think that is a very important issue already today with our webinars. We are raising awareness, hopefully, to a larger group community about the problem. So far, it has been a problem that only very few people, and thanks to you mostly, have been made aware of. So I think there's an important awareness raising dimension to it. I think that the issue is not so easy to solve. No, I mean, probably the easiest way to solve it is to say, no, you just don't use any artificial intelligence-based recruitment software, and you go back to human-based recruitment, which of course we also know it also has its bias, but okay. But that might probably be not the solution. A lot of interest in it. We can understand from the point of view of a large company that is faced with so many applications that they want to find some way of filtering that. No? So it's unlikely that companies will not use the software. We have seen some companies deciding in the meantime to sort of at least put it on hold, no longer to use it again because they are aware of the bias. So that's already good. But sooner or later, first, that not every company will do that. So we need to find ways to eliminate the risk, or at least to minimize it as much as possible. No? Now, we usually say in our space that we speak about universal design, and we say that, and we said it also in this publication we launched yesterday. the more that people with disabilities are part of the research teams, the more we can ensure that disability dimension is taken into account from the beginning, versus running after the train and always coming too late, because by the time you've made that train accessible, or that new software already not, the new version is coming out, which again is not accessible. So I was just wondering, have you seen any example, and question goes to both of you, particularly also to Yves, have you seen, I know you also have, you're using the employee resource group, business resource groups within the IBM. Do you see that there's an interlink there between, or can you see already that there are persons with disabilities directly involved in some of these R&D processes? I think that is could be part of the solution already, to take that dimension into account by directly having people with disabilities part of these R&D teams.
Thank you, Stefan, for this question. Actually, you're absolutely right. People with diverse abilities will play an essential key role in making sure that accessibility becomes no longer an option, basically. What we did in IBM, as you said, we have business resource groups. This is how we refer to employee resource group internally. We have more than 30 resource groups worldwide. So what we did is that we built a team of testers living with different types of disability, blind, mobility, cognitive, hearing, whatever. And we asked them to play an active role in testing the applications that our team developed, that we also acquire and deploy internally, because it's also important to make sure that our procurement team, our buyers, take accessibility into account as a key criteria, as a mandatory criteria, when they discuss with vendors about the acquisition of an application. Because in the past, we saw that accessibility was not really discussed as a key criteria for negotiation. As a result, when the applications were deployed internally, they were either partially accessible, not compatible with assistive technologies, or not accessible at all, which means that, as you can imagine, it had a direct impact on the performance and productivity of our employees. And to avoid that, we did two things. As I said, we created what we call the team ABLE. So it's composed of employees, most of them being technical, living with different types of disabilities, that will test the applications that are being deployed in IBM, so that they can provide technical recommendations to developers, to technicians, etc., to make sure that the tool prior to his global deployment will meet the accessibility requirements, at least a minimal level of accessibility requirements. And in addition, we've put in place training programs to educate our procurement teams to make sure that they take accessibility seriously as part of the negotiation, the discussion with the vendor, so that working both at bottom-up approach, from a bottom-up approach, leveraging our employees, as well from a top-down approach, leveraging the organizational structure of the IBM Corporation, it's really effective. And this is also what we do with the AI topics that we are discussing today. We really leverage all resources that we have internally, the AI ethics board, the AI Alliance, that you may be aware that our CEO, Arvind Krishna, as part of the Forum, World Economic Forum in Davos, is now leading the Global AI Alliance. So we try to find all avenues possible to make sure that this topic becomes part of the AI ethics board, the AI vision that IBM has. It's extremely important.
Thank you. We have a question to you, which links to what both of you said. There's also definitely a need for policymakers and legislation to deal with this issue. And basically the question is around, is anti-discrimination legislation in particular, like you have in the UK, the American with Disabilities Act in the US, as you know, the UN Convention has a very strong non-discrimination focus. do you think that, I mean, you've mentioned also the consumer protection part, but focusing for a moment initially on the anti-discrimination legislation, how much do you think is it ready to deal with these new forms of discrimination? And have you seen any sort of discussion about, or sort of trying to see how to tweak that legislation to cover these situations?
I think because we're stuck in this paradigm where an individual has to take an employer to court to prove under the ADA or our legislation that they were treated unfairly by an algorithm, right? And so I'm not seeing much creative thinking about how that shifts. What we have in our legislation under the customer right of access is an anticipatory duty where you have to anticipate that you're going to have wheelchair using customers, and so you have to be barrier free for people with mobility impairments in advance. You don't have to wait for someone to turn up and then take you to court because it's not there. Now, I'm not optimistic that we're going to see that kind of legislation usefully deployed here in the near future. I do think there are a lot of lawyers in America that are looking forward to this because the time it's going to take for individuals to prove their case is going to be considerable and their fees will go up accordingly. We do see some sign though that governments are starting to look at this seriously. The government of Canada has announced that they will only purchase artificial technology on the condition that they can see what's in the box. And because of the commercial confidentiality argument around the algorithms and the commercial secrecy there, it's when the buyers insist that they have to be able to look in that box if a citizen of Canada suffers harm as a result of the government using this technology. I think that's where we're going to see the most action in the short term.
Sounds good, sounds good. I have a more difficult question to address, which has come from Nancy Doyle. Nancy, as you, Susan, as you know her well, is a top expert on neurodiversity. Now, the question has disappeared from my screen, so otherwise I would have read it.
I can see it.
Well, try to deal with it. The question from Nancy is basically whether artificial intelligence is sort of not flawed almost from inception in terms of this focus on the norm, on the majority norm versus, of course, which always, let's say, almost by definition exclude minorities. I'm sort of rephrasing Nancy's question, which of course was worded much better, but a very interesting general reflection. But Susan, give it a try.
Well, as someone who's not an expert on artificial intelligence, just on the impact, I think I know where Nancy's going on this. And yes, there is an argument that says if it's big data that drives artificial intelligence, then outliers, the non-standards, will always be badly served. Jutta Treveneras at the Institute for Inclusive Design in Canada is doing some very good work on this as a data scientist, looking at how you shift the artificial intelligence scientists, if you like, from seeking data which is helping them to predict stuff in the future and to move into comprehending what it is that you're actually looking at and what you want to achieve, rather than looking for the numbers which you can spin to predict trends or whatever in the future. I think we are seeing two things happening. One is the science which says that I can predict Stefan's performance on the job by the way his face communicates emotional responses when I tease him or insult him. There is no scientific validity to much that's going on there in terms of just the assessments. Never mind the fact that those assessments are then being delivered or managed, if you like, for the company with an artificial intelligence tool. So Nadja Guillaume at Goldsmiths here is doing some very interesting work, looking at the actual science that underpins psychometric tests online. Who can prove that these psychometric tests actually have scientific rigor behind them? And then you ask someone in one of the neurominority groups that Nancy is particularly working with to go through a psychometric test online, and you might as well ask a wheelchair user to climb stairs. It's just nonsense. But even if he could get up those stairs, I'm not sure that psychometric test is going to tell the employer anything really useful.
If you've mentioned the issue of procurement, I mean, as you know, well, you both know, the whole issue of procurement can be, if well done, can really be a game changer in terms of promoting accessible products. would be, and the question goes to both of you, but if perhaps you give a first go, what would be your advice to a company that is currently now considering buying such a software? Would you tell them to sort of wait? How could they include in the procurement requirements something that would ensure that they're able to buy a good software, assuming to some extent, perhaps I'm wrong, that probably all the existing software right now in the market, none of it is adequately addressing this issue?
Absolutely. It's not that difficult. It's just a matter of making sure that you have the appropriate executive engagement within the organization to make it a priority and no longer a nice to have. Basically, all procurement organizations do have some sort of a checklist that, with a list of requirements that must be met as part of their negotiation to acquire and deploy an applications internally. And if you simply make an amendment to these criteria to include accessibility as having the equal value as cost or quality in general, basically there is no need to reinvent the wheel. The accessibility standards are everywhere. They are available on Google. If you type accessibility standard, you may get tons of different websites, but still, everything is documented. So there is no need to hide behind saying, I'm not clear about what accessibility means. Everything is clearly defined. So all the procurement team has to do is to simply include accessibility requirements with a reference to a list of criteria that must be met as part of this negotiation with the vendors. And most of the time, honestly, our vendors are listening to us because, it's a big market, right? So you tend to listen to your clients when your clients have a real value for you, and you want to make sure that you will satisfy them. So if our procurement team clearly says, okay, your products are good, but did you think about the compatibility with screen readers? Did you think about making sure that, the fonts, etc., are accessible? So they will think about it, and they will come back to you with the appropriate remediations to their product. And most of the time, I must say that we launched this, we implemented this amendment since July last year, and ever since we have not received one single complaint for something that was deployed after that date that was not accessible, simply because now it's become mandatory.
Yves, I have
I think that makes a lot of sense. But Susie, you were shaking the head. I mean, the problem I see is how, yes, from let's say from an accessibility point of view, we are working on digital accessibility. I think, it should be done much more, as you say. But how do you apply that to this software based on AI, which is almost every software that is out there is sort of has this.
Well, it's unfair. I think there's a difference here between the inaccessible and an unfair recruitment process. So what you saw me shaking my head at was HireView argued their website was accessible. It's just that they then took decisions about what you could do on the basis of data that was not reflective of your reality, right? It's the science they were quoting at the heart of it that was part of the issue. So accessibility is hugely important, but the kind of questions that we would be asking, the companies that produce these artificial intelligence tools tell us about how many and which persons with disabilities were actively involved in helping you to understand their reality when you were mapping the reality. How did you factor in when you set the objectives for this assessment, how it was going to respond for people who used a variety of communication methodologies, right? So if you've got a 3-minute limit on the questions you're asking in the interview when the robot interviews you, what happens if the person stammers and needs an extra 10 seconds? So it's asking the right questions in terms of their involvement and understanding that disability, how they're going to factor in the reality, the lived experience of disabled applicants trying to get through this process, with accessibility being part of the puzzle. And so I do think that Celine has started to list some of those questions in her white paper. We've sent the link out to our audience, but it is new territory. because of course, it's not just the artificial intelligence tool manufacturers, it's the fact that the HR and the diversity people who use these tools don't understand disability discrimination. They don't understand they have to say at the beginning, what kind of adjustments would make it easier for you to go through this process? They don't explain the process to the candidate so they can anticipate, oh, I'm going to be interviewed on a video. Oh, I need captions. I better tell them. So it's
Susan, if Celine would have been with us today, we would probably, I would have asked her, what more can we do to get disability more prominently on the discussion on the ethical dimension of artificial intelligence? We have just 5 minutes left, so any sort of brilliant final idea around that, and then I will just have a final minute just with addressing a couple of other issues that have come up in them.
There's a question I see saying the CRPD committee are preparing a paper on employment. For me, the disability sector shouldn't see this artificial intelligence as a niche issue. It's about how people get jobs. And we need to be working much more closely with the business community so we understand what they do when they set out to offer people jobs, because otherwise we can't coach individuals on how to get through it. I do think your question being, how do we raise the profile of this? Everyone who's on this call, and we had 60 people going mad on LinkedIn. Everybody saying to the CRPD committee, why haven't you got this yet? How can we do that? Here's a white paper. At least starting to ask the questions. We're not at the point where we've got the answers, but putting pressure on every business disability network that we know to say, where's the guidance that you're offering your members in case they're tempted to start to move into this? And somebody needs to offer guidance to the individual. How do you negotiate when you need to get through these processes and you have to ask for a different approach without the stigma bell going on that says, oh, we've got a disabled one here, what do we do? So any organization and any funder trying to get people into work needs to understand this, because this is how you get jobs now.
Yeah, but I think putting the onus on the individuals is tough, no? Because I mean, if
no, but I'm saying they need guidance as well. I'm not saying
for sure. But I think it's mostly what I think also the issue of class action, which in the US is I mean, if there's in this, we can really prove that there's this embedded bias. Disability organizations will and other partners, national human rights institutions, need to take a role in that. Yves, a final reflection from your side.
Well, as Susan said, it's, although AI system, as I said, must be transparent, robust, and explainable, the development and deployment of AI are still in their early stages. And so now is the time, as Susan said, to spread the message, to make this issue much more visible. Because if we wait 6 more months, if we wait 1 more year, this will be much more difficult to tackle, because everything will become operational at that time, and now at the time, really, we don't have much time. The window is shrinking day after day, and we need to act now.
Yeah, and it's part of the e-recruitment problem overall. It's not just this, it's e-recruitment. So thank heavens, Stefan, that you're starting to address that.
Exactly. We have the participants. We assume we have hopefully many other hundreds of participants who have watched our video through the live stream. The event has been, the webinar has been recorded. We're gonna create a section on the GBDN website focusing on this issue, where we're going to put this video as well as the different white papers and documents that we have managed. The ILO is involved in the drafting process of the general comment on the CRPD committee. We are providing technical support to the committee on this issue, and definitely I fully agree with the participant who has raised that issue. We will be bringing this issue to the attention of the CRPD committee. They had asked us to be ready to address some of the new challenges that are coming. So I think I cannot think of a better example of a challenge that we need to address. And I fully agree, if it's the time is now. No? So thanks to both of you for having volunteered to address this frontier issue in such a clear and timely manner. Million thanks, and thanks to all the participants who have listened in. I think really this has been an amazing session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Have a good end of the day.
Thank you.